Welcome to the Healthified Mother podcast, where we discuss ways to enjoy pregnancy, birth, and motherhood. My name is Corey, and this is my lovely wife, Christy. This is episode 6, and we are back to the topic of parenting. And for those of you who don't know or might be new to the Healthified Mother podcast, Christy and I have 10 children together, and we're looking to have more. So parenting is a huge topic in our household. So, what we're going to be discussing today is something Christy and I created that we call our Dugan Family Mission Statement. And we're just going to kind of go through what that statement is and why we have it, why we read it at least once a week, and what it means to us and what it will hopefully mean for our children. But to start the discussion off, like, why did we even bother? So, Christy, why did we even bother writing up this this whole page of what our Dugan Family Mission Statement is? Why bother with the effort?
So that's a good question. I feel like the reason that we decided to create that is so that for ourselves and also for our children, we would know where we were heading, right? Our goals, our dreams, our vision for our family, because that way we can all be working together for a common goal. We can feel belonging, and we can take ownership for our actions, and it just kind of helps guide us. Like any company, any business is going to have a mission statement and a vision statement to help guide that company forward. And I should say any good company. There's a lot of companies that fail, that don't have that. Yeah. But for the companies that are successful, right, they have a vision and a dream and a goal that they're working towards. And we felt like that would be important for our family.
And for me, I think about, it goes back to culture for me. Culture is kind of a foundational thing, not just for society, but for individual families. And I don't know that your family had a statement that you would call your family's mission statement, but you definitely had a cultural. Your family, your family. When I got introduced to your family, had its own identity inside a culture that your parents had built.
Yeah, we had written up a mission statement when I was a young teen, and we had like our own motto. We would say, like, no empty chairs. We all wanted to be in heaven together. We didn't want to be up surrounding the dinner table, so to speak, in heaven and have somebody missing. So it was like, it just created a cooperation, right? Instead of competition, we were all in this together. We all wanted to be in heaven together. It wasn't, I hope I'm in heaven and you're not, right? It was like, the goal was to all help each other, to all cooperate so that we could meet that common goal. So we had written up a whole statement. We didn't read it weekly, and I would guess my mom has it somewhere, but the rest of us probably don't remember what it said. But you're right. We had created a culture around that. And so we kind of knew our place, our goal, who we were as the Verhagen family.
Yeah, and it was even if you didn't read it, I still think I saw evidence of it when I got introduced to your family, and there was just a way that you all were united around a common vision for the future.
Yeah.
And that's something that I lacked in my family. I mean, my father and mother maybe they didn't know how, but they didn't have a shared vision for what the Dugan family was all about. And so it was to do it for us. I think having had so many, having so many children, it's like, how can we get so many organized around this effort? Because it takes, like, people say to us, oh, you must have your hands full. And it's like, we're way past that. The whole, like trying to control your children and micromanage them, that's out the window. That's not even a possibility for us, because there's so many little minds, so many little ideas of what they want to do, what they think should be happening. And I wish we'd have done this sooner. We did this within the last year, created this mission statement. So by no means has it been in force, or have we been doing it for a long time. But when I read it, every time I read it, I feel a clear idea of, okay, what direction are we trying to move together as a family?
Yeah, I agree.
And so I want to just help, because for me, for a long time, I didn't quite understand what the whole point, or what even culture was, how you could build it. Like, what was the process of building culture? What does that look like? And I just want to kind of give that a definition and maybe get your input on this, Christy. But for me, as I've come to understand it, culture is a shared identity and story. You look at the biblically speaking, the children of Israel, and they kind of had an identity that they carried with them once they left Egypt, and that was slaves, former slaves who are now free, and that was like an identity culturally that they carried forward, and they were always seeking freedom, because they didn't always remain free. They got back to being taken over by other people, and they were always seeking their own freedom. And that's an identity that still to this day, maybe you could say, they still carry as the war rages on. They're still looking to secure that freedom for themselves, for better or for worse. And that's their cultural identity. And so and that's the story of their culture.
Yeah, sovereignty. They're always looking for sovereignty. They want to govern themselves. They don't want Assyria or Babylon or Egypt or anybody else,
Anyone.
the Nazis or anyone to be oppressing them or governing them. So yeah.
And that started essentially, it started with the family of Abraham. So a culture, a shared story and identity can start with just one family. It doesn't have to be. You can join into another culture, and you can be part. You can have your own family culture inside of a larger culture, and that's something that we're attempting to do right inside of our faith, to have our own family identity that fits right into our faith, the culture of our faith.
Yeah, I like that.
Well, do you have anything more you'd like to say about the concept of family mission statement? And probably after we read ours, we can talk about ways that other people could create their own. I mean, they could use ours as a
well, I think just
foundation.
The importance of having one to help. My dad used to talk a lot about buy-in. He'd say, you guys need to buy into this project or this goal or this family goal. And I feel like we did, but because we didn't read a statement or something weekly or monthly or periodically, it felt like it was coming from the top down, right? My parents trying to not force, but encourage, you guys should do this, and this is our mission, and you need to buy into it. And oftentimes, at least for me, I felt like I have bought in. Why are you still harping on that? I feel like I have bought in. And I think because it was from the top down versus building it like a grassroots movement, it felt like maybe some people had bought in and maybe some hadn't, but it didn't feel like my thing. And I wasn't quite sure it was our thing. I knew it was his thing, right? And eventually, it became more. And by the time you came along into the family, I feel like there was a lot more buy-in and it had become our thing. But for our family, I want to avoid that and like encourage everybody to choose into it, and not to feel like we as the parents are telling them this is who Dugans are and you have to be this way, but like holding up an opportunity for them to accept and to be a part of.
Yeah, I mean, you can't force anyone, anyways. Even if you try and impose it on someone, even if it's your own child, that
Yeah.
doesn't. It only works in maybe for a short time until they like rebel against it. So yeah, it ultimately comes down to persuasion, and I think for me it comes down to leadership of like exemplifying it and then inviting.
Yeah. And
Uh,
even persuasion, may not even be the correct word, because it's more like an invitation. It's like I don't really want to persuade my children to live that way. I want to invite them to, because I feel like it will bring joy and happiness to follow these um, standards, or whatever you want to say, that we've created here. This vision, this mission. I would like to invite them. I don't want to persuade them, because that, for me, has a connotation of like it's against their will, and I'm like twisting it to somehow like make them choose it, to make it appear alluring or something, and that's not my goal either. My goal is to like, here's this opportunity to invite you to be part of it, to participate with us in this shared goal, and hopefully they will um, accept the invitation. So, like, I wouldn't want to persuade someone to come to my birthday party, but I would love to invite them to come. And if I invited them and they came, it would be such a better birthday party than if I had to persuade them to come. That feels like really
they
negative
felt
for me.
obligated to come,
Yeah, yeah,
and that's fair. Fair enough. True. And part of my personal resistance to having created this and also to reading it and trying to incorporate it as our family culture is my own hypocrisy, because I'm not perfect at living up to these standards that we've created. And nobody is perfect except Jesus. He was perfect, but like all of the rest of us are in some shape or form hypocritical because we're not perfect at following along, even the things that we profess to believe and being perfect and acting always in accordance to what we believe. But that's a huge difficulty for me personally, is to accept my own hypocrisy and be able to profess like, okay, I'm not perfect, but still I hold this publicly. I hold this as my value, even if I know I'm not perfect and I fail at it sometimes.
yeah. Well, and as Christians, we do that, right? Like, as Christians, we uphold these characteristics that we value, and we say, well, the attribute of faith, or the attribute of hope, or forgiveness, or charity, and like, we want to be like that. We believe everyone should be like that, and that's the example Christ left for us. And yet, we all recognize we're sinners and we fall short of that um, example, of that standard that Christ set. But it doesn't mean that we don't that we stop proclaiming his gospel, that we stop being ambassadors for Jesus Christ, that we are no longer missionaries, or followers of Christ because, well, I'm a hypocrite, I'm imperfect. Like, we're all imperfect, we're all hypocrites, and as Christ said, the gospel is like the whole have no need of a physician. The gospel isn't for perfect people.
Yeah,
It's
it's just I want to acknowledge that publicly because it is what holds me back from doing a better job of uh, because my uh, one of my constraints on myself is being afraid of looking bad. I always want to I'm afraid of looking bad. I don't know if it's associated particularly with looking good, but I'm afraid of looking bad. And when I'm a hypocrite and it's publicly visible, I like avoid that situation. So I'm stating that in a way just to kind of let the cat out of the bag. For me, mentally, let the cat out of the bag and to be able to be more free to be in my expressions. It's like, yeah, I might be a hypocrite, but I'm still going to try and be more free with what I really believe is important, even if I'm not perfect at it.
And I can totally relate to that because I have probably my whole life also had this desire to not be seen as bad. So again, maybe not so much as good, although I don't, I do, of course, want to be seen as kind and loving and good, but mostly I don't want to be seen as like associated with evil or the devil or anything bad, right? And so there's definitely a fear of like, oh no, I yelled at my kids. I'm going to appear bad or whatever it is. And to give myself grace and to recognize I can't control how anybody views me ever. My version of Christy Dugan is completely different than your version, than my children's version, than my mom's version, than anybody's version of me. There are millions of versions of me. Whoever knows me has their own version of who they believe I am, and it's different than who I think I am or who I think I want them to think I am, right? And if I could just let go of that and stop trying to control it, like there's going to be some people who think I'm an insensitive jerk, and there's going to be people who think that, oh, you have such a perfect life and everything just must go so good for you, and like no, right? Like everybody's got issues, and when I let go of that, I'm able to feel like be more effective in fulfilling my commitments to myself and to my family, because I'm letting go of like the fear of failure, the fear of looking bad.
So now that we've expressed our limitations as human beings, let's go on to the ideal, right? And that's why we created this document, was to create an ideal for our family to try and live up to. Do you have anything to say before we start reading it?
No, well, yes, this is an ideal for our family, the Dugan family. So, if others want to write something similar, like that's the word to remember, is similar. It would never be exactly the same, because this is unique to our circumstances, to who we are. And this isn't a standard we're holding up for everyone else. Like, you should live like the Dugans live, because you're not the Dugans, right? So just helping everyone understand that we're not trying to project this on others and say, we think that this is the best and this is how everyone should live. This is just our personal mission statement for our nuclear family.
I mean, for example, this isn't even a perfect ideal for you or me individually. We came together and negotiated this document and came to agreement on the particular words. We had discussions and concessions about what we thought was the word to use. And so this document doesn't even perfectly represent what I think is most important. For you, it's a combination, right? We came together and had to negotiate the document. So for anybody else, it's definitely highly recommended. Sure, use it as a guide, but really focus on what resonates with you, and if you're going to try and make your own mission statement for your family, what is important to you, and try and incorporate that into language.
Yeah.
All right, so I'll read the first sentence. Here we go. We, Corey and Christy Dugan, solemnly proclaim that our marriage is ordained of God, and that our family is central to the Creator's plan for the eternal destiny of us and our children. What do you have to say about that?
I just feel like that is really important for me and for my children, for you to understand our divine worth, to understand who we are and that identity as children of God, right? If we remember that we are children of God and that He has a plan for our lives and that we can align our will to His and follow that, that we have the promise of eternal life. So that right there, it starts it out with, this is what you need to like have a base foundation. None of the rest of the document would really matter if you didn't believe that first statement.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like, again, we go back to cultural, identity and story, and it's a link. Like, we're not the first. This Corey and Christy marriage thing isn't the beginning. It's actually a continuation of another story, and we're linking back to that.
Yeah.
So, foundational issue of like, our story didn't begin with us getting married. It began long before God created us, and I mean, it began long before we got married. When God created us.
Created our union or sanctioned our union.
Yeah. All right. As children of heavenly parents, we and our children have a divine nature and foreordained missions to discover and fulfill. And thus, Dugans do life quests.
So we have 5 of these mantras that we say as a family, and the first one is Dugans do life quests. We, as a family, believe that God sent us to earth with specific objectives that He invited us to fulfill and missions to perform. And we, of course, have the choice to learn what those are, to discover what those are and fulfill them, or we can, flat out turn our back on that whole idea and say, I don't owe anybody anything and I don't have to do any of that. And, it's completely our choice, but God invited us to fulfill these missions that He has that help to further His plan here on earth. And as we seek to discover them, we gain more insight into who we are, who we were before we came to this life, who our spirits were. And so Dugans do life quests, meaning we seek to find what God has sent us here to do, and then we try to fulfill that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think of it as the parable of the talents from the Bible. A guy gave 1 talent to one guy. What was it?
2 talents.
2 talents to another guy and 5 talents to another guy, and then he left. And talents were sums of money, and large sums of money. I think maybe like you could relate it to like 10,000 gold pieces or something. Was that accurate?
Yeah, it was a very large number, yes.
A talent was a huge sum of money. And the Lord comes back, and the guy who had 5 turned it into 10. So he doubled his Lord's wealth and was like, here, Lord. And he gave him 10 back. And he was like, good job, thank you. And the guy who had 2, he turned it into 4. Again, the Lord was happy with him. And the guy who had 1, the Lord was displeased and like took what he even had and is like, why would I leave it with you? I'm going to give it to one of these guys because all you did was bury it. But so we use the word discover because there's and I don't think it's an accident, right? The word talent, where we have divine talents that God has given us. You could call it a spiritual gift, some kind of talent something innate in us that's like a representation, or that just is part of the greatness of God. You know, like you take Mozart or someone who's super obvious, they have this genius that they're just born with. And we all just have little pieces of divinity in us that we're meant to discover what that genius is and to bring it out, basically, not exploit it,
Share it
elevate
with
it,
the
share
world.
it,
Yeah,
use it to bless the world for God's glory.
and there are people who, whether they're religious or not, they'll say like, I feel like this is my calling in life, right? Like this is what I'm supposed to do. Like they just know they're supposed to go start an orphanage, or they're just supposed to go work in, some corner of the world and do something that they feel called to do. And that's kind of what the implication of this is. Like, it's a calling, it's a quest, it's a talent, whatever you want to call it, that we feel like we've received from the Lord, and it's our job to discover it, to cultivate it, and to share it with others.
An example of this that's not religious, and maybe to some you would be like, that's not even a good example of what you're talking about. Like, why would you say that? But I think it's a great example. The guy who created Famous Amos cookies, I think his last name was Amos. I can't remember his first name, but he originally was a agent. I think an agent. He worked with musicians and worked with some very famous musicians as an agent, and didn't like it. He was making lots of money. He was probably, you would say, well off, representing really famous musicians. He was successful, but it wasn't. He wasn't comfortable with where he was at in life, and somewhere along the line, and I think it was because, I think as the story goes, every time he would like have musicians come and meet with him, he had cookies that he had made himself, and they were always like, they loved his cookies. Man, you make the best cookies. And then it was like he discovered, like, wait, this is what I love. I mean, this is my favorite part, is making these cookies and seeing people enjoy them. And so he started a cookie company. And, he literally was of the mindset, I don't care if I make money or not. I just want to do this so much that he risked everything and started a cookie company, a cookie store, I think, is what he started with. And, well, he started a cookie company. It was very well, made lots of money, became a millionaire from making cookies. But it was his passion, and it's what he loved. And because he loved making people happy when they ate his delicious cookies.
It was
Doesn't
his
have to be
life.
complicated.
Right. It was his life purpose. And for some, yeah, they might say making cookies isn't a very good life purpose. But if it was his life purpose and it's what drove him and what fulfilled him, cool.
Yeah,
So,
it's all about what is important to you. And for him,
yeah.
what was important to him was making people happy. And the way he discovered he could do it is like by making awesome cookies.
Right. Yeah. So helping discover and fulfill our life's purpose, I guess, is a good summary of that.
And the whole point of Dugan's Do Life Quests is to instill in our children's mind that they have quests out there in their lives for them to discover and then to go out and fulfill. To have that be a baseline idea in their heads moving forward as they get older and as they get into their adulthood. Even now, they can, when they're practicing their music or doing some, practicing art, one of our children is demonstrating pretty proficient or love for art, and maybe that's going to be part of his mission in life is doing artwork. So, next statement, we declare it our mission to fulfill God's first commandment to Adam and Eve by having a large posterity to replenish the earth. With heavenly help and the blessings of the restored gospel, we intend to raise up our children in righteousness according to the word and admonition of the Lord's. Dugans are different for a reason.
Yeah, so again, very personal to us. We have no intention to ever tell anyone how many children they should have. There's no should about it. for us, we feel like the Lord has given us an opportunity to bring his spirit children here to earth, give them a body. And that has felt, before we even got married, we were drawn together by this idea of having a dozen kids, right? And I don't know how many people know this, but Corey was voted most likely to have 12 kids in his high school senior yearbook, right? So that was something that, you know, at first, I guess you were upset about it. Like, I never talked to anyone about that. Like, that's not fair to give me that superlative. But for me, I just felt like I wanted a lot of kids and I was going to have a lot of kids. And like that was a calling in life for me. So when I said that I wanted a dozen kids and he didn't bat an eye on our first date, it was like, wait, what? Because almost everyone else I had gone on a date with was like, a dozen? Are you kidding me? You know, maybe 6, maybe 5, you know, like this idea of a dozen was like deal breaker. And for Corey, you didn't even, you know, it was just like, and I didn't know what was going on in your mind, but you didn't like guffaw. You didn't act like, what's wrong with this girl? And so that kind of, you know, ended up being a piece of our story. And so we've always felt like that was something important for our family. But again, for our family, if somebody else wants to have 1 kid or 20 kids, like that's for their family. And it's not my job to judge or decide or should on them. You should. No, like this is for us. So, yeah, like that felt very important to me.
And again, this is a document for our children so that they understand why. You know, if ever any of our children are like, oh, I don't like being the middle child, or I don't like being the ninth or 10th child of 10. Why do you guys have so many kids? You know, like sometimes children have that question, like, why do mom and dad, nobody else has, like hardly anybody else has this many kids. It's to explain to our children why we've made the choices that we've made and why we're going to continue to have more children. You know,
Yeah.
the goal being, in my mind, to right off the bat let them know, like we're with joy in our hearts going to try and have a larger family. Yeah, there's going to be more challenges every time more kids are introduced to our home. It creates new challenges, but we want them to look forward to it, know it's coming, and look forward to it with joy. That the challenges that it'll bring to them, not just to you and me.
Yeah. And again, it's for our nuclear family. When they get married, they get to choose that for their family. So they're in my mind, there isn't going to be this, well, you're a child of Corey and Christy Dugan. How dare you not have a large posterity, right? Like that's between them and their spouse and the Lord, and not like me as grandma, like, come on, where's my dozen grandkids, right? Like that's not my place. So yeah, it's for me, it's for you, it's for our children to understand why we've chosen to do that and that we have felt called by the Lord to do that. So this isn't just a willy-nilly. I mean, when we lived in Alaska, uh, they have dividend checks, right? And people were like, oh my gosh, you're just doing this like to get paid by the government because you get $1,800 or $2,000 or whatever every year for each one of your kids. Like you're making bank off of having babies in Alaska. And I'm like, okay, first of all, it's a lot more than $1,800 a year to take care of a child. So yeah, that whole idea like is ridiculous. It really had nothing to do with finances. Like I didn't feel like, if money is tight, I don't feel like that's a good reason for me to put stop on the Lord, right, and say, sorry, we can't afford more kids, because I feel like if he has called us to do that, he qualifies who he calls, and he's going to send us more children and then send us the abundance that it takes, that it requires to raise those children. And, you know, I have no intention of sending them all to Ivy League school. So if finances are not exactly where we would hope that they are or whatever, it's not a big deal to me, because the Lord has always provided for us. He's always taken care of us. We've always had what we need when we need it. Not always what we want, but what we need to live and to be happy. And I don't feel like we've ever really had to suffer, you know, like we weren't living in poverty, we weren't starving, we weren't sweeping a dirt floor, right? So
Yeah, and again, going back to this culture we're trying to create within our nuclear family, we want our children to right off the bat know that yes, when you meet more often than not, when you meet other children, they're going to be shocked at how many siblings you have. Your family's different. You have how many brothers and sisters? So the statement Dugans are different for a reason, and we just want them to be comfortable with being different and understanding the reasons behind it.
yeah, we're different than any other family, and that doesn't make us better than any other family. It just makes us
All families are different, anyways. But like
exactly. But
kids
it
struggle with that. Like kids struggle with wanting to be fitting in and whatever. And it's like, look, we're not trying to fit in as a family with anyone else. We're trying to fit in as us, as the Dugan family.
Yeah. And so I feel like for them, our goal with that statement is to help them feel like they belong, like they have an identity as a Dugan. We're different. We're different than everybody else. Yeah, we homeschool and we, like have different things that we do. Like we, as a family, we wear our church clothes all day on Sunday. Most other families don't do that. That's okay. Like it's all right to be different. Doesn't mean that we think other families are bad for not doing that. Doesn't mean we think other families are bad for not having a lot of kids. It's just our personal choice, and it feels right for us. And helping our kids understand that without, like, the hope is I don't want my kids going out and judging other people like, oh my gosh, we have 12 kids, why don't you? Right? Or we have we keep the Sabbath day holy, why don't you? Like that's not the purpose of it. It's to give them an identity of who they are as a unique individual, but also as a collective part of our family.
Yeah, well said. We established the Dugan family on principles of righteousness, faith, prayer, repentance, forgiveness, respect, love, compassion, work, and good, clean fun. We love and care for one another, serve the family needs and the needs of all of God's children, and observe the commandments of God. Dugans do difficult things.
Yeah, and following that whole list, that's the part where you and I probably struggle with the hypocrisy part. Like, oh my gosh, we're not very good at doing all of those things like all the time. Sometimes like, yeah, I aced that. And other times like, okay, tomorrow I recommit and I'll be better, right? But that it's difficult. Dugans do difficult things. We find it worth our time and effort to try to improve in those areas, to hold that up as an ideal and to work towards it. Yeah, we fall short. Yeah, it's difficult, but it's worth it. So Dugans do difficult things. And that has helped, I feel like, with in homeschooling, when the kids are like, I don't want to do this, or this is hard, or, um, they don't always enjoy practicing their musical instruments every day. They don't always enjoy doing chores. Okay, mostly they don't enjoy doing chores. Who does, you know? But it's worth doing, and it is difficult. And sometimes when we repeat that, and I've even heard some of the other kids say that to their siblings, like, Dugans do difficult things, right? Like when they're complaining, this is hard, I don't like it. They're like, you're a Dugan. Dugans do difficult things. And that kind of has like helped them, I don't know, like perk up and like, yeah, okay, I can do this. Like, I'm a Dugan. I can do difficult things.
Yeah, and I think that statement goes back to those studies that people reference all the time about like the marshmallow and if the child waits, they get twice as many marshmallows, or if they just eat it right off, that's the only one they get. But waiting, for example, being patient is a difficult thing. There's all kinds of things in life that are difficult but worth doing. And again, just having that Dugans do difficult things, including all the things that were mentioned prior to that statement, basing our life on principles of love and respect, forgiveness, and it's not easy, but it's worth it in our mind to do difficult things, to live the gospel of Jesus Christ. I think is probably the most difficult thing in the world to do, and that's what we feel we're called to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because again, it goes back to us all being sinners and us all being imperfect and hypocrites. And despite all the difficulties and obstacles in the way, our own weaknesses being the number one obstacle, it's worth doing. And we're going to do it not because it's difficult, but in spite of it being difficult.
Yeah. I was thinking about this recently. I used to have this idea of like daily repentance as like a very negative thing. Like, oh, I don't want to repent daily, because my idea of repentance was like having this little self bashing session where I just like, here's all the ways that I failed today, and I'm so bad, and I'm such a loser, and I'm sorry, God, for just being so lame, and please forgive me and help me to be better, because I don't even know if there's hope for me, but I'm trying. And like, it was just really negative, right? And then, I don't know, in the last few years, I shifted my perspective to daily repentance being like a gift, and being this idea of setting a new intention, of saying, okay, here's like going back through and looking and saying, here's where I said I wanted to be, here's where I am, fell short, true, but I'm recommitting to that today, right? And so giving myself patience and grace, and receiving the Lord's grace, because I can't do it. Like, there's no way I could ever earn his grace. I could never deserve forgiveness. But as I was able to like view it as a time to recommit, to set new intentions, and say, okay, I'm evaluating this, this week or this day or whatever, and I'm moving forward with a new intention. That made repentance like exciting and enjoyable, instead of this drudgery or this like scary thing that I had to do. And that has really shifted. I feel like it's shifted my desire to be better, because I'm focused on what I intend to do, instead of focused on what I don't want to do. Okay? And if I'm focused on all these sins that I don't want to commit, I'm more likely to commit them than when I'm focused on all the good things that I'm trying to do. I'm more likely to accomplish those than fall into this sinful place or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So we're almost done. We've only got a few more statements to go here. We believe that family members have differing responsibilities. Namely, the role of the father is to protect and provide, as well as connect with the children and exemplify courage, passion, integrity, and love for their mother. The role of the mother is to nurture, nourish, and educate the children and model hope, cheerfulness, empathy, and kindness, and show respect for their father. The children's role is to honor their parents, serve the family needs, and be kind to one another. Dugans do their duty and keep their word.
Yeah, and for our family, like we talked about, our roles, and in some families, the mom is the breadwinner or the provider, and the dad is the nurturer or whatever. But for us, we felt like this was the roles, your role, my role, the children's role, and helping define that clearly. I feel like that's helped me focus on what I'm supposed to do, not try and nitpick and make sure you're doing what you're supposed to do, or try and take over some of your responsibilities. And same for you. Like, I don't feel like you're trying to make sure that I nurture the kids or that I am, educating them properly, etc. We're allowing ourselves to just fall into those roles, and sure, we fall short, but at least it's not like micromanaged and nitpicking. We recognize this is my role, I can fulfill it. And in any business, if you don't have clearly defined roles, people start stepping on each other's toes. People start getting into each other's business. People start trying to take on a role that's not theirs. And you're like, whoa, 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 that's the secretary's role. No, that's the vice president's role. That's whatever job, they're supposed to do. And it messes things up. So by clearly defining your role and my role and the children's roles, that helps us move forward in a more organized and efficient way as a family.
You know what it doesn't say in there is discipline. Does it say that anywhere? Which of us is supposed to discipline the children? Anyways, I say that because it's kind of there have been times. It's very interesting to watch our older children. They don't know what their role is. I'm one of the older children. Okay, so sometimes they take on a role and like I'm going to discipline this younger child because they're doing what they're not supposed to. And I know I've particularly looked at them and like I'm here, and why are you trying to father your brother or sister? Whether they're a boy or one of the boys or one of the girls. Are you like don't try and discipline me. I take that, if they assume the role, I take it back and I'm like, you don't have the role, and I'm not giving it to you to discipline your siblings. Let mom and dad deal with that. But I think that's something that we haven't written there, but like it's kind of a shared responsibility between us. I don't feel like either of us has assigned the other as the disciplinarian.
Yeah.
We assume it
Well, and I think
mutually.
that because our role as parents, we don't feel like is, we don't punish our kids. We don't try to, we don't run a rigid household where.
But in terms of teaching and instilling discipline,
but yes, we do discipline our children in the sense that we are trying to teach them to be disciples, and that there's consequences for actions, and we can't just allow the kids to
teach them what behaviors are acceptable and what behaviors aren't acceptable.
Right. Like if one child bites another child, like, okay, that's not an acceptable behavior. But sometimes if the younger kids or the other kids try to take on that role, they may do something that in their years of wisdom is really not that wise, right? And I've seen them try to hit each other or pull, scratch, pinch, pull, push. All of those things
to get the other one to do what they should.
Yeah, I don't consider that discipline. That's punishment. And we're like, no, that's not what we feel
I
is.
mean, we just dealt with it, like we cut it out, or we're going to cut it out from the podcast. But we just had an example of this with one of our children coming to the door there behind you, and he was getting hit. And what was his brother doing to him?
He was just trying to make him be quiet, and he was pulling on his arm, and he didn't like it, right? So, like, we asked them to be quiet while we're filming, but by no means do we expect or hope that our older children are bullying our younger ones into being quiet, right? Like, that's not the model that we're going for. And so when that happens, we're like, okay, hang on, let's discuss this again. Like, please be quiet means help them understand, hey, mom and dad are filming, but not, hurting each other or, yeah, exactly.
Got the quieter out. And I think for me, this having this written out, I know it's helped me to understand my own identity as a father. Like, what is my identity as father? Beyond just the identity that society has inculcated in me through watching The Simpsons and as a kid and watching my father and so forth, but to create an identity that incorporates what's important to us as what is the identity of father in the home. That's something that I'm getting benefit from as we read it every week.
Yeah, I agree. It definitely helps me want to be a better, more nurturing, cheerful, loving mother, right?
And then the statement, Dugans do their duty, and then we added this later on, and keep their word. Just as kind of, again, a foundational core principle of what we hope to inculcate in our children is just this foundational idea that I do my duty, whatever they feel their duty is, like, do their best to do it, and keeping their word is just, I would call it a skill, a highly valuable skill for life.
Yeah. Well, it's a character trait that is highly valued in our society, right?
In
Well,
all
he's
society,
a
I
man of
think.
his word, or she has so much integrity, right? Like, that's highly valued in our society. And as Christians, right, that's something that we're taught in the scriptures, is to have integrity, to keep our word, to be honest. And so keeping our word, I think, like, Jesus told a parable about this. He said there were two sons. The father said, go do this thing. And the first son said, I will. And he didn't. And then the second son said, I won't. But then he did. And which one do you prefer? Which one's better? Which
Which
one would
one's the better
God
son?
be more happy with? Obviously, the one who actually did it. Even if he at first said he didn't want to, wasn't going to, but changed his mind and chose to do it, like, people respect that. Like, even if you're struggling with something,
The
I don't,
honesty of, like, no, I'm not going to do it, and yet you did. Like,
but
that's better
right.
than, like,
That's so
the
much more
lie.
valued than the one who's like, yeah, I will, and then totally flakes out and doesn't. Like, yeah. So
Absolutely, yeah. And so that's something that I see as we inculcate that in our children, just by repeating it. So it's something they come to have in their heads and believe about themselves, to set them up for success in the future in their lives, and whatever career or whatever they do, as it'll help them pursue their quest, their life quest. Is just going to be a benefit to them and to our family. We hope that'll be a benefit to their family. Is Dugans do their duty. Hey, your duty is to do your chore.
right. Yeah, and we've had that, as I'm sure every family has. We've told our kids, hey, go do your chore. Okay. Hey, go do your chore. Okay. 10 times later, you're like, whoa, you still haven't loaded the dishwasher? Like, that's not keeping your word. If you said you're going to do it, go do it. And that just helps the family to run more smoothly and be more organized, because if someone's dropping the ball, how can the next person do their chore of unloading the dishwasher or rinsing the dishes if the counter is full of the dishes that need to be loaded, right? Things don't run as smoothly if somebody's not keeping their word.
Yeah, a little personal story. And again, this is highlighting my own imperfections, but it was around chores where I lost my temper rather recently. And it was one of our children hadn't done a chore, and we were going to go drop them off at an activity. And I was like, oh, I just saw that you said you were going to do it and you didn't do it. Okay, so we're going to wait. And everyone else was like, but Dad, we're going to be late. And I'm like, yes. And so told me they were going to do their chore and they didn't do it. And so I'm going to wait here and everyone's going to wait for them to go do their chore. And so they ran out and they go do it. And then they get back in the car. And I hadn't lost my temper yet, but I was like, and then they just started like, because everyone was like, oh, why'd you make us late? And then they started blaming me. and, I lost my temper. And that was, I mean, it's a rare thing for me to lose my temper, but it was definitely one of the rare occasions where I lost my temper with them and made them stay home. And, but this statement of Dugans do their duty and keep their word, hopefully is designed to avoid those situations. I know for me, my duty is to not lose my temper with my children because that hurts them. And I saw how that hurt that child in a negative way. It hurt our relationship. And I had to, work to repair it and move forward.
Yeah, and that happens. And of course, it's unfortunate, but as parents, we are imperfect. We're
Perfect.
And, there's just going to be times when we fall short of this ideal and this standard. And I mean, I feel like you handled it well and that you took time with
After
that.
the fact, I handled it well.
After the fact went well, you took
Did not
time
handle it well.
to prepare that and to admit, like, hey, I'm sorry, Dad made a mistake here, instead of like, well, it was your fault because you were trying to blame me or whatever, right? And a lot of I feel like a lot of society, at least American culture, ever since like World War II, maybe before that, but from the time that my grandparents and their parents were alive, it was like the dad never apologized. The dad was always in the right, and well, son, you're at fault here, right? And it's so to me, it feels like it's a rare occurrence to see a dad apologize and be like acknowledge when he's at fault. And the more of that happens, the more I feel like the kids are more respectful of their father. Every time my dad apologized, which became a more common occurrence the older he got, but when I was growing up as a young kid and even as a teenager, it was rare if my dad said, I'm sorry. And he might say, I'm sorry, but then it was like, I'm sorry, but you shouldn't have, like his apology was kind of undone by telling me it was my fault, right? And that was how his father parented. That was how his father's father parented, right? And that was, you see that in all the movies, all these old westerns with John Wayne and all that kind of stuff. Like the men, like it's a sign of weakness to admit you're wrong. And nowhere in Christ's example do we see him like, nope, you always have to be right, like, and you should be really firm on that. Like as a man, it's important that you're always right. Like that's not any standard in religion that we see. And yet how many Christians throughout time have upheld that patriarchal standard of, the man is always right, the father is right, and the kids better not sass me or cross me or whatever. So I appreciated your response. I thought it was appropriate to acknowledge, hey, lost my temper, I'm at fault here, sorry.
Yeah, and we're all going to have those moments where we, I'm emotional thinking about it. So, it just is what it is. It is what it is. The 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 triggers that our children, for whatever reason, maybe it's designed by God. Maybe it's just because there's so much like this. I have a theory that our triggers are closely associated to, in part, in one sense, what bothers us the most is often what we do. you know, like so we resonate with it, and that's why it triggers us. But we have a tendency to do it ourselves. And I think that was true that time when I got angry with one of our children. Okay, moving on. Dugans live by principles of rare faith. We learn and follow universal laws and receive the blessings of abundance associated with those laws. Dugans are deliberately blessed.
So I love that line, Dugans are deliberately blessed, because I believe that there are laws of the universe, God's laws, that have blessings associated with them. You follow this law, you receive this blessing, and if you follow that law, you will always receive that blessing because it's a universal law, and God would cease to be God if he withheld the blessing for that thing. And I think a lot of times we don't understand what all those laws are and how we're following them or how we're receiving the blessings that we're receiving. But every blessing we receive is based on one of those laws. And so sometimes, we receive blessings and we have no idea why. And other times we willfully, intentionally obey a specific law and we expect an outcome because we understand what that law is that we're obeying. So that line, Dugans are deliberately blessed, we are striving and seeking to follow universal laws. And as we become aware of more universal laws, I don't want to say new because maybe new to us, but they're not new. They've been around for eternity. But as we become aware of universal law and then try to be in harmony with that, we receive those blessings and we can expect those blessings, because just like you can expect that if you jump off a cliff, you're going to fall. That's the blessing you get for jumping off a cliff, right? Like that's the law. And if we are following these laws, we can understand what to expect. And that isn't to say, well, God owes me anything. No, it's just universal law. You have this outcome that will occur if you follow this principle. What goes up must come down, or an object set in motion continues to stay in motion unless it's acted upon by a force, right? Like there's these laws that we understand, and as we follow them, we receive those blessings. So we believe we're intentionally or deliberately blessed. And that, I feel like, helps me appreciate God so much more, because the other ideology is that God's just handing out blessings like willy-nilly, like eeny, meeny, miny, mo. You get a blessing. Oh, now you get a blessing. Like that's not how God works. He desires to give all of us all that he has, right? In the scriptures, it says that we can receive all that the Father has. And if we obey his commandments, if we obey those universal laws, we can receive all of that, and we can expect to receive all of that because that's what he's promised, and God doesn't go back on his word. So it helps me actually appreciate God so much more and recognize what a loving and kind and gracious Father he is, because he's not just eeny, meeny, miny, mo, you get a blessing today and you don't. Like he is a very compassionate, caring, and intentional Father.
Yeah. A simple example is the law of the harvest, right? A farmer who doesn't plant the seeds in the ground can't expect a harvest in the fall. And even the farmer who plants the seeds but doesn't water them can't expect a good harvest in the fall. He could, maybe God will have it rain sufficiently.
Right.
But again, if he hadn't planted, then even if it had rained, anyways, it's there's more than one of these universal laws, right? But
But
they're
also understanding that,
they can be understood logically and followed and applied so that we're seeking blessings deliberately by
yeah,
following.
and understanding that, like the whole harvest thing, if you plant carrot seeds, do you get celery? If you plant apple seeds, do you get plums? Like, no, we understand that you reap what you sow, that you harvest whatever you planted, and we can't expect, well, I paid my tithing, so I deserve the benefits of keeping the Sabbath day holy, right? Those are two different things with two different blessings associated. Well, I honored my parents. What's the blessing with that? That thy days may be long upon the land. Well, I honored my parents, so I should have the windows of heaven open unto me and receive, all this money. No, that's the blessings associated with tithing, right? Like, we can't expect to receive, well, I kept this commandment really good, so why isn't the Lord blessing me with all these things? Like, as we understand which principles we're following, which laws, commandments, whatever we're keeping, then we can know what to expect. And if you didn't know what seeds you were planting, you just had a handful of seeds and you were planting them, you'd get all sorts of things in your garden, and you wouldn't understand, like, why did I get like asparagus and celery and cucumbers and all these different things. Like, if you thought that you were only planting, oranges or whatever, right? Like, if you didn't understand what you were doing. And so the more we deliberately keep and follow God's commandments and laws, the more we can know what to expect in return.
And these are foundational principles that we're teaching our children, right, through these statements. And like on top of that statement, that what we're talking about is a degree of surrender. And it's not expressed here, but it's something that I expect that we'll have to teach our children in the future, because it's something that we're learning, right? We're learning about these universal laws and how to apply them in our lives. And yet, being deliberately blessed also involves surrendering to God's will. Because the law of the harvest, if you plant the seeds and you do everything you can to take care of it, surely you're going to have the harvest. And it's like, well, God could send some hail. And that's happened to many people, where the harvest doesn't actually happen.
Right.
Or locust or whatever.
Birds could come and eat the seeds before they grow. You could have an early frost. Like, there's all sorts of things that you can't control. But that doesn't.
So there's just a degree of surrender that goes with it, to where even if you thought you did everything you could to get a certain blessing, and maybe you don't feel like you deserve it, that it's yours, but you're kind of expecting it, and maybe it doesn't work out the way you expect. Surrendering the outcome, despite your best effort.
That with the law of polarity, okay, however bad that outcome was, you can expect an equally and oppositely good outcome. So, all right, my crops totally failed. There was no harvest because there was hail or whatever. All right, what does the Lord have in store for me instead? Because he's not going to just let me die.
And an example of that, I remember reading, I can't remember the name of the author, but he was telling his own story of his life. And his father had a farm, and it was like L-shaped. And they were having, like, the harvest was going to be awesome. It was going to be one of their best harvests ever. Maybe it was corn or something, was just looking beautiful. And then one day, towards the end of this, or towards the beginning of the harvest season, I think, like they were getting ready to harvest, and he just remembers he like literally watched as a storm came in and hail hit, and he said, according to him, it was like literally only this L shape, like the cloud delivering the hail literally stopped and like kind of moved and followed the L shape, and then literally of all their neighbors, they were like the only one that was decimated. And so their family finances were decimated, and it was a huge crop failure because the hail like destroyed it all. But out of that, he said was a huge blessing. Their family ended up moving to another state, and he said it was like hugely important for his and his family's ultimate mission to be in this new location and to learn and grow in new ways. And it was a blessing in the long run in his mind. And so that's an example of how, you have to surrender the outcome. Like in the moment, they wanted the harvest so that they could pay off all their debts and, be financially set. And God had another idea for that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So even when it feels like, what? Like I obeyed all these laws, like what? How come I'm not receiving what the Lord has promised? There's always something better ahead, because the Lord has his ways are higher than our ways. He has a more eternal perspective. And so what seems like devastation, what seems like the worst outcome ever, often ends up to be so much better than we could have planned for ourselves.
Yeah. Anyways, I said all that to say, teaching our children that Dugans are deliberately blessed is like level one. And then, like as they get older, it's like, yes, but we don't, God still is in control of the outcomes. But we can still do everything we can to pursue his blessings and his grace. All right. And as the final statement we have written, as mother and father, we provide a shared vision for the future of our family and our life purpose. And that's the extent of our family mission statement for the Dugan family. So let's recap here real quick. Let me zoom in again. Dugans do life quests. Dugans are different for a reason. Dugans do difficult things. Dugans do their duty and keep their word. And Dugans are deliberately blessed. And yes, we did it on purpose, using so many D's, because it makes it easier to remember. Dugans do, that Dugan do. I can't remember, there's some TV show where it kind of says something similar. It's not exactly Dugan do, but it's or maybe it's someone from my life that said that. Maybe it's not a TV show. I'm just having this because what do they call that? The DD
alliteration.
Alliteration. Yeah. Alliterations help people remember things, and so we use alliteration to help our children to remember these. Dugans are different for a reason.
Dugans do. There's some kind of TV show. I'm thinking like Scooby-Doo.
No, now that I remember, I think it was a particular friend that I had who called me like Dugan Do or something. Like he would just say my name funny and say do after it in a funny way. Just he was a big jolly guy, and he was just trying to have fun with me using alliteration. So anyways, that's our family mission statement, and we've been reading it for I don't know how many months now, having finished it for a number of months, and having been reading it, and it's slowly, as Christy, as you mentioned, it's slowly starting to kind of sink into our children's mind to where they're starting to repeat it back to each other, and it's having a positive impact on our family, let alone doing it's really starting to create greater connection between us as we have a better understanding of each other's roles and being able to connect as a family in this place, this shared story.
Yeah. So we will have it available as a file that you can download if you want to read it and create something similar for your own family on the healthifiedmother.com under file share, I think is what it says. Anyway, it'll be available there for you to look over. And, that again, purely for our family, but if you want to use it as a sample or a template, I guess would be the word, to create something for your own family. We put a lot of prayer and thought and effort into that statement. It took us a while to craft, so it wasn't, just something that we created on a whim. And I feel like anyone who takes the time and effort to create one will definitely be receive the benefit, greater benefit, by putting in that same, time and effort and thought into creating one for their own unique family.
And even if you just copied and pasted your family name in there, it'll be better than nothing. But way above that is personalizing it to you and your family, and especially what is important to you, what you value, and what values you want to inculcate in your children. So definitely highly encourage personalizing your own mission statement as a family. But I think it's it's a very useful tool for creating a foundational culture in
Yeah.
your home and for your family and for you as a parent.
Right. Well, and I think the creating something that is unique to you and personal to you, if there's things in our statement that you don't agree with, for example, you might not feel like it's your mission in life to multiply and replenish the earth, like, man, I had 2 kids and I'm done, or whatever it is, right? Or maybe you haven't had any children at all and you're looking to adopt, whatever it is. If that feels like off to you, you wouldn't want to just put your family name in there and read that, because every time that would rub you wrong. That would be like, no, that's not, like, I can't say that. That doesn't feel accurate for me. And so finding what feels accurate for you as you read it is going to be the most profitable for you, for your family.
Absolutely. Anyways, I thought we were going to end this. I thought this was going to be like a half-hour edition of the podcast, but lo and behold, we put a lot of thought into it. So I guess that means we had a lot to say about it. So thank you for watching. Do you have anything else to add before we finish up, Christy?
No.
Thank you for watching, and go out and create your own mission statement. Have a nice week.